this is really incredibly important stuff. This is saving, as Bordago said, it can save Ukrainian lives every day, because it catches the drones and also some missiles. Now they're actually managing to use electronic warfare to down some of the missiles. So it's a very important advance in the fight of the war, and you have a chance to get on the ground floor here. Go over to MriyaReport.org. This is the future of warfare, and God willing, the future of Ukrainian victory. So give what you can, and thank you. Okay, James, let's go back to what we were doing.
I've completely forgotten the topic. No,
I'm sorry. I forgot one other thing. I just wanted to say I got a text in the back channel for somebody, a Polish guy who wanted to come up and discuss this with us, and we didn't bring him up. I just wanted to say, apparently we have not been seeing requests from some people, because I did not see this fellow requesting at all. My sincere apologies. I would have brought you up if I had seen you. And if anybody else has requested in the past and we didn't bring you up, there was no one I was ignoring tonight. So if you didn't get called up with a request, we mustn't have seen you. So my apologies, but I'm seeing requests now. Okay, James. Sorry.
He probably got mad that I said the thing about the biolabs. Sorry, dude.
Must have been, yeah.
Marcus, it's usually your fault. What are we going to do? No, it's not. No, I think I know where the fault lies. It lies not in you, but in our host. But I should say that more quietly, so as not to offend them. Anyway, we were talking about the last section, and I was saying that I titled it "Russia Invites Us to Dissolve," and it is it is very much a case where we're hearing from various voices, and they're all throwing out and voices from the West that are throwing out support for Russia in one way or another. Some of the American voices to me were especially disturbing, like Paul, who is, a libertarian, which means you can do whatever you want. And war's bad. War's really bad, but American wars are terrible. But now I support Russia's war. So it's like, what? That kind of inconsistency is sort of a giveaway. And others that are in here. Lyndon LaRouche, who he, as they say, is leader of the American Crypto Nazi Organization, and it is these ideas go right to the heart of the Holocaust and blaming the Jews for it, and that's there's this international Jewish oligarchy, and they're the ones who've done all this evil stuff, which we've heard this for so long. It usually starts with the protocols of the elders of Zion, but he's not going that far back necessarily, as as described in the book. But I had not known about this Stephen Cohen fella, so I'm sorry. I so apologize to all the fellas out there. This pernicious person, Stephen Cohen, who turns out is a Russian scholar, which be careful, I guess, what you study, right? Because he's very supportive and has written in the Nation magazine about this, and lots of propaganda pushing again. And it's just amazing what they can get away with talking about. And he's talking about the prime minister of Ukraine, and he's saying, well, the prime minister has been calling his adversaries subhuman, and that's proof of genocide in and of itself, and things like that. And then the Russian media mistranslated the word to get it to mean subhuman, right? So inhuman is what he'd said, and they changed it to subhuman. So these are
A
the
little
voices.
different.
Yeah, a little different, and that's the point. Is these little changes sometimes make a big difference. And so this Cohen guy, who's passed away now, has a big role in America, and then and I'm zipping through this, so I'm going to slow down and let you talk about perhaps if you're headed this way, Vandenheuvel, and some of the other voices.
Yeah, this part fascinated me. Let me just ask you something though. It was Ron Paul who was the endorsed your age and everything, and you know, did he support the? Is he still around even? I think it was Rand Paul who was so bad on the Russian invasion. Correct?
Yeah, Rand Paul's his son.
Rand is the son, right?
Yeah,
And
but
he's still around. Ron Paul was in before him, and he's well. They're neither one are really solid voices on Ukraine, though. Let me put
no,
it that way.
yeah, okay, no, that's but it was Ron Paul who was the original bad guy, and it's Rand Paul who's he's the younger one of the two.
Like
Yeah, okay.
father, like son.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, wacky. uh, okay, anyway. So now this is the question, and we're now on page 213 for those of you at home. He asks a question: how were the opinion leaders of the left seduced by Vladimir Putin, the global leader of the extreme right? And this is a really fascinating thing because this I was really puzzled by this. I was reading this until we got to him explaining why it was, and then I realized that really this is absolutely right. Um, it's he talks about, and there was Vandenhovel and some other people. I didn't actually. If you want to go into the specifics, I didn't. I only took. I pulled out the the concepts, but I don't have the specific people. Other than I know it was the Guardian and the Nation, both of which are well. The Nation I always thought of as a left liberal kind of publication, but what the point of this, that people on the left and people on the right who both seem to be supporting Putin, who, as he says, is a global leader of the extreme right. And it points out a very insidious thing about Russian propaganda, and something that we absolutely have to keep an eye on and remember at all times, that Russia generates trust based on what people are likely to believe and targets that. So, as we saw in 2014 in Ukraine, they tried to trot out this thing about the Ukrainian Nazis to Jewish groups, and to the Jewish groups. I mean, and then to the Jewish groups, where they tried to convince the Jewish groups that the Ukrainians are Nazis. They tried to convince the non-Jewish Ukrainians that the Jews were trying to foment a rebellion against them. And this is very typical fascist behavior of since we don't care about factuality and we don't care about consistency, we will say whatever we need to get that emotion again ginned up so people stop thinking and start reacting. Lexicon.
Yeah, a lot of stuff here. Well, just so as you know, Stephen F. Cohen was an awful lot of trouble right up until, as you mentioned, maybe early on in this war. He had the good grace to die. He was the spouse of Vandenheuvel, herself the editor of The Nation. No surprise, Cohen got published in The Nation anytime he had spewed out an article. So and so The Nation pops up on YouTube. They do these interviews. Amy Goodman, I think. So Snyder has allowed himself to be interviewed by her sometimes. They to maintain their bona fides as leftists, they have to interview some actual progressive people sometimes. I guess I don't know who else they interview. I only look if it's somebody I think is interesting, relevant, and good. But how do these leftists get hoodwinked by all this stuff? To me, like that's my group of friends, and I think they're so fixated on American injustices towards the South, the various parts of the world, that they've it still doesn't. I mean, it just in terms of pure honesty. Anyway, it prevents them from seeing Russia. So what in pure honesty prevents one from seeing Russia? That's what I've never grasped. They're so fixated they cannot admit that Russia is, never mind not a worker's paradise, but not nothing socialistic or left wing or progressive, and has not been since since the 1960s or since forever or whatever you want to say. Certainly, the Soviet Union was already gone, and we've got so many authors of the times, let's say in the 1990s, after the Soviet Union fell apart, how Russia wandered, and how at no time did it much look like the good of the ordinary population was going to be brought to the fore again. And so I don't know, it is a mystery why people who consider themselves progressive and in favor of the good of the common person cannot see, can have their vision so clouded as to be unable to see that this is no longer even state capitalism. This is like the mafia state. But I spent a lot of time yesterday explaining this to a good friend, sincere friend. It's I don't know, they benefit from some weird veil of ignorance that has shrouded Russia since forever. So just to say those few things about the nation and Cohen and Vanden Heuvel and that lot. Anyway, they've been a lot quieter since the man passed on to his reward.
But that's a foundational myth about the Soviet Union, is the Bolsheviks were psychopaths from the beginning. They were always in it for the power. It's a foundational myth that was ever about the working people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
100%, yeah.
it's just that the working people in Russia believe the myth. That's the trouble.
And so did many of us here. I mean, I think part of the
Absolutely.
issue, part of the problem, and this is, I feel this very strongly, having had been on a almost 2-year deep dive into learning history I should have learned in school. We know nothing about Eastern Europe particularly, and we knew precious little about Russia, really. I think part of that, it's easy when you have people, you have a regime that lies as a matter of principle, and is completely uninterested in keeping to facts. Talking to people who are not don't have the don't have the background to understand that it's probably nonsense. So when we've been brought up to believe, as as we were, with freedom of the press is a great thing, and we're exposing all sides, and whereas we always assumed that everything we were hearing was the truth, it was different ways of looking at the same thing. We were completely unprepared for this kind of. We were unprepared to cope with the lies, and we did not have the knowledge to even be able to vet it as it was being given to us. And that's just not just us. That's also these writers who, I think part of it was they didn't know, and it was a little bit of laziness, and who speaks Russian, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of these writers were not looking at original language sources, and they couldn't. I mean, this is one of the reasons that Snyder is so good at what he does. He speaks Polish, he speaks Ukrainian, he speaks Russian, probably speaks Belarusian, knowing him. He speaks all these languages, and he spent a lot of time on the ground there. He's not sitting in a Slavic studies department somewhere reading old books and getting fed whatever people want him to. The Russian subsidized departments want him to know. And so you talk about one of the things he says here is that they what they the Guardian went on about this, about Ukrainian atrocities in Odessa, which were a total figment of someone's imagination, and also the Trump about the far right nationalists and fascists who were at the heart of the Maidan protests. And as he points out, this is rather than reporting on 1 million Ukrainian citizens laboring to turn the rule of law against the oligarchy in Maidan. And one of his money quotes here: an odd choice for a newspaper with a left-wing tradition. Absolutely, 100%. Expounding, Russia Today talking points. And we should all be ashamed that they should be ashamed that they did, and we should be ashamed that we ever believed them.
So yes, indeed. And so there's some other players that we know who appear in this last section, and I'm going to skip through some of these names just to mention them and talk a bit about them. And so Marie Le Pen, of course, is active, and she's tied to Mr. Spencer, the American one, who is the kind of leader of neo-Nazism in the United States at the time. And so they were ginning up this idea about this Cold War 2.0, but they didn't present any evidence of that. And they then they talked, they were talking about these, and I'm just jumping off that topic because that could open up a whole nother line of discussion. The there are false calls for a ceasefire in a civil war, right? It's like, wait, what's going on with this? It's not a civil war first, right? But it's too late. The discussion's past that for Russia. They just keep going on, and this new Cold War was partly based on this idea that it isn't soldiers, it isn't the military, it's all these gay people that are, and it's like, what? That makes no sense either. So we're getting down to near the end of the chapter here, which is good timing, I guess. But a couple things. Excuse me. Uh, they're accusing Ukraine and the West of being fascist and of conducting a genocide on Russian speakers, right? We've talked about that theme. It's all the Jews' fault, all the Ukrainians' fault. And the West is
Ukrainians are honorary Jews for these purposes.
Oy vey, I think it's okay to say that. I'm sorry, Robin, for stepping on that. But anyways, so yeah, it goes on, and they offer no proof for any of this stuff, as typical. But what we see from Russia is the proof is not necessary if there's no discernment in the audience, and frankly, there isn't much. And so I'll just jump to an American politician statement that Putin isn't going to go into Ukraine. You can mark it down. Well, at that point when that was said, they had been in Ukraine for 2 years, already. So it's like, hey, American politician, you're misleading the people very badly by omitting the entire factuality of the situation. But this is the way. This is not our way. This is their way, and I don't like it. And this was something, as we all know, it happened right after the snipers were murdering people on the Maidan. So, and can I keep going, Robin?
Yeah, go.
Okay, well, I am then. Okay, this is a quote that closes the chapter, but I don't think should close the discussion. Um, when a presidential candidate from a fictional world appeared in the United States, Ukrainians and Russians noted the familiar patterns, but few of the American right or the American left listened when Moscow brought to bear in the United States the same techniques used in Ukraine, uh, uh, and the view on the American right or the American left noticed. And so the United States was defeated, Trump elected, and the Republican Party was blinded. Democratic Party was shocked. The Russians supplied the political fiction, but the Americans were asking for it. So that's literally how that chapter ends. But it is all cautionary tale for us, and we should take them to heart and listen to Snyder because he has great insight into this. So go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I think that one of the other things Snyder says is Ukraine was the warning that went unheeded, and I think that's very true. I'm not sure that I think that Americans were asking for, wanted this, but we certainly were swallowed it whole because, as we were talking about, we need to educate people better, and we need. I think I'm hoping that with what's gone on in the last few years, there are at least a lot more people in this country and in the West in general who are onto what the Russians are doing. I hope it's enough, but I think I think we think we are in a better state than we were at one time. And with that, as James said, this is definitely a discussion that needs to continue. I hope that we will in the future have more discussions, particularly about Russian interference in the West in our elections and in Europe, because these are very important topics. I'm looking for some good readings. I was thinking, James, I didn't mention this to you, but why? What the heck? Live radio. I'm thinking it might not be a bad idea once in a while, in the middle of doing books, to take a serious article, an article that treats something at some length, and use that for in 1 week to discuss. There's one particularly that I've read recently about it's called On the Historical Disunity of Russia and Ukraine, which was sort of an answer to Putin's bullshit address about how Russia and Ukraine were the same things. But we may some of these issues don't have book length treatments yet, so we may want to do a little change up once in a while and delve into a good meaty article. Anyway, over to you, James.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I think there's a lot of things to talk about besides the book length stuff. I just want to say this is sort of out of left field, but not really, because it is about genocide, and that is that I feel like, besides waking up to the dangers of particular politicians, we also need to figure out how we're going to shatter the pretense of Israel committing a genocide. And, Ukraine is much further along in kind of shattering that myth. But I don't think that is the crux of it for us. I think the crux of it is, how can we talk to our youth and get them to see that, and also consider how necessary it is that people are honest about genocide, because we can all lose in genocide. That those people might be next, but they won't be last. Once these things get started, that's how it goes. And as we heard on Friday night, I believe it was 79 million people have been genocided since the convention. So we're not doing good at that. And part of it is that the truth is lacking in these things. And the reason it's so lacking now is because Russia got there first. They have had obviously a long planned and very effective information campaign that has made these things up and then made parts of them come true, and then relied on their allies to do the rest of the acting. And it's amazing how effective it's been. It's pretty scary, and Israel isn't that big. The risk of genocidal completion is a real thing, which I am convinced that's why the emergency aid provision that the United States was used for Israel, and not Ukraine, because I think Ukraine, while it's a danger, it is much more prepared to deal with its enemies, because it's got a great neighborhood backing it up, and Israel lives in a rough neighborhood for them.
I have to think about that. Yeah, I mean, they both. One of the things that we've learned from discussing this book, really, and looking at how Ukraine has been treated and how Israel has been treated, is they're obviously parts of the same disinformation strategy. I find it hard. I find it difficult that some people don't seem to get that yet. But anyway, so listen, James, I wanted to thank you. We really this book has been very rewarding, but it's been a tough book to work on, to present. So I really appreciate you. James sort of jumped in when Alan had other issues and wasn't able to keep on with the book club, and I've really appreciated it. And starting next week, we will be going on to a very different book, also very rewarding, but a different. These are two sociologists who have looked at what we were talking about before, Ukrainian civil society, and basically how it got that way. It's called The Zelensky Effect by Olga Onuch, Onuch, and Henry Hale. We will be starting that next week. A great book. I've read it. I've read it once. I'm going through it the second time. Very interesting, and explains a lot. it takes Zelensky as a model, basically, of your basic Ukrainian. That has Zelensky is a unique individual, but a lot of why Zelensky is because he grew up in Ukraine, and talk about what you know how Ukraine made him the man he is today. So it's a very interesting book, and I recommend it to everyone. Hope everyone will be able to join us next week.
I
That
got a
over
phone
to
call. I gotta take. I gotta
okay,
go. I'll see you.
go
Bye.
go. Okay, sorry, James. Okay, lexicon. Yeah.
Yeah, I just got my copy yesterday, so I've read a bit of it. I wasn't initially keen on it, but wow, yeah, I am now. Um, just what you say, and how it's not that the man made the country, but the country made the man. And what I also really keen, what I like a lot is in the years we see the years leading up to Maidan. We They talk about uh, the years the independence generation grew up in, what was going on, the evolution of this civic identity and civil society in Ukraine. Another thing is the years from Maidan to now, to this war. And I notice on the space that people often ask about that, and people ask me in conversation. So after the Maidan, did they just kind of let it ride for a while, and then the war happened, or did they keep going? So this book helps people answer that question. They kept going, but details about it, that's what I really feel a tremendous thirst to know about this stuff in greater detail. And so I'm really enjoying it so far. I think it's an excellent and amazingly researched book.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not and well written, but it's yeah. It what is how many? It's got to be over 100 pages of of figures and stuff in the back and notes. This is based on I never remember. Lexicon, what's the name of the organization? It's the International Sociological something or other in Kiev. It's the organization that
Yeah,
does all the best.
KIIF, right? Kiev
Yeah,
International Institute. Well, that should have been social studies. KISS. Well, I don't know either. KIIS.
sociology must be at the end, but yeah, they're the ones who do all the really authoritative um what do you call it polls. So yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. You're one of our more educated readers. If so, Lexicon likes it. It's a great book, guys. Go out and buy it and come and join us. And I'm really looking forward to getting into this because it's again covering the same history, but in a very different way. And I think we will end up after having read this book knowing Ukrainians much better than we have before. So I'm looking forward to that. Uh, and I would just say, welcome, Prince. Haven't seen you in at least 10 minutes. Nice to see you.
I know, right? And it's like it's like I have I think every co-host has a little ritual. And mine I was like really late in even starting it. And so I had to go do it. And yeah, and it's going to be my advice to anybody who is having problem connecting to the space. My advice is check for a software update, check for a Twitter update, restart your phone. Those are the three things that I do before I co-host every single time. So,
And I do too because Prince told me to, and I do what Prince tells me. And Prince, I just want to go over to Lexicon real quick, and then I'm going to take my leave of you and let you guys get on with your
that's fine. That's fine. I like her. And
No, I had only wanted to say that I discovered near the end of chapter 1, she mentions that they've got this online appendix that has the most amazing richesse in it. It's got like the entire transcripts in Ukrainian and English of the entire series of Servant of the People, Zelensky's show that ran in 2015ish, 2016, that was very popular in Russia, by the way. It's got anyway. There's the online appendix is cited there near the end of chapter 1. Talk about sources. You can just every one of Zelensky's speeches, like before and since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, all his speeches as president, it's, I could read it out. I guess it's somewhere near but anyway, we'll talk about it next week. But that's an amazing accompaniment to this book that is a great resource for anybody.
Thank you. I didn't even look at that. Yeah. Servant of the People, by the way, is not the movie. The movie is not so great. The movie is just glommed together pieces of the series. The series is absolute comedy gold, and you actually get a pretty good picture of its social commentary. You get a pretty good picture of the things that the Ukrainians wanted to get away with, the corruption, everything that it carried over from the Soviet Union. So not only is it a lot of fun, at this point it breaks my heart to see how young he looked, because he certainly doesn't look like that anymore. But he was a great actor, and it's definitely worth. And it's mostly in Russian, which is interesting. I mean, he was a Russian speaker, but yeah, I learned a lot about Russia, about Ukrainian society that has turned out to be true from that series, and like I said, it's a hoot. But anyway, with that, Prince, I want to very, very quickly mention tomorrow morning, when Prince is still fast asleep, 9 a.m. Eastern time, I will be speaking with a friend of mine, Yaroslav, who is a Ukrainian American guy, young man. I think of him as a kid, but he's a young man who emigrated to the U.S. as a child, grew up here, went to school and everything. Worked in. I met him working with Razom for Ukraine. He's very active in Razom, and he decided about 6 months ago that it was not enough, and he is now in Ukraine, getting ready to enlist. I don't think We'll talk to him tomorrow. He had a number of offers for different units, and he decided it wasn't enough to be working here. He had to go and fight for his country. Wonderful guy. I mean, I absolutely love him. I worry about him now. But he will be on with me 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, 9 Eastern, which is 2 p.m. London, 3 p.m. Berlin, and 4 p.m. Kiev, and middle of the night where Prince is, so she won't be there, but I forgive her. Anyway,
6 a.m. It's 6 a.m. on Pacific time.
I'm so sorry.
And to me, oh, shut it. Anyway, to me, yeah, that is middle of the night. And Robin, I would like to sincerely apologize for my typo, which called you in an inappropriate name in a personal DM today.
Oh, I have to go back and look. I don't think I even noticed. I'll go back and be offended retroactively.
No, you won't. You're gonna laugh so hard it's crazy.
Okay, I definitely will look at. Okay, and with that, I see that Defo Dave is with all like whatever those whatever usually happens to Dave life must have been taken care of already. So I'm going to get out of here, and thank you. It's Lexicon Marcus. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you all next week. Slava Ukraini.
Slava. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Fight Night on. No, I'm just kidding. I just felt like a like a WF announcer there for a second. But Marcus is here, so there's always hope. It's good to see you this evening, my son. And we were waiting for
Hello.
Dave to join us. Hello. And we're waiting for Dave to join us and Gina to join us. And we will be having a great conversation tonight in depth with Gina Christian. And we were talking today about what we are going to talk about tonight. And I think we might have come up with a good idea here. And that happens sometimes. Hi, Gina. How are you?
Good evening. Long time no talk.
It has been really, really long time.
I think about 40 minutes. Maybe longer than that.
I don't know.
Longer than that.
Yeah, longer than that. But yeah, it's good to hear your voice and glad to have you with us again tonight. And still waiting for Dave to get up here. That might take a second, I suppose. I could check messages, but Anyway, I just want to go because I don't want to keep you a whole lot longer than you are able because tomorrow's Monday. You got to work. And I feel bad keeping you up on Friday nights, but not quite as bad because the next day Saturday. However, I know things and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's Saturday. I know that. It just doesn't. well, here I'm going now. Excuse me. Waking up. It has been a crazy day for me. I think it's been a crazy day for you too, Gina. But when we were talking earlier about what are we going to talk about tonight on on In Depth with Gina Christian, there's a note that I had written down from our conversation about understanding genocide on Friday. And that note was 4 words: acceptable level of violence. And when I mentioned that to you this afternoon, you said, that's it. That's what we need to talk about tonight. So, Gina, what do we need to talk about when it comes to acceptable level of violence?
Well, to back it up a little bit, we had mentioned on Friday night, I had the pleasure of speaking with Professor Christina Hook this past week for an article I'm writing for Kyiv Post. And Christina, of course, was the lead on the July 2023, the principal contributor and author on that joint report from New Lines Institute and the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, which followed up on the May 2022 joint report from both of those entities, which stated that Russia is waging genocide in Ukraine. And the second report that Christina led talked about how it's accelerated. And so the need to hold Russia accountable and to prevent further genocide and to punish Russia was, according to the terms of the Genocide Convention, it was even more urgent. And in the context of my conversation with her, I had asked her towards the end, what are you seeing? And bear in mind, Christina actually had studied and worked in Ukraine years before the full-scale invasion. She was there in 2015, and that's all if you read her bio in the July 2023 report from New Lines and Raoul Wallenberg, you'll see that. But she had studied the Holodomor, and then of course was there, as post-Maidan, and well before the full-scale invasion. So she has a deep knowledge of Ukraine and its history and the dynamics that are in play right now. And as I said at the end of our conversation, I'd asked her, what coverage are you seeing or not seeing out there? And she said that she would be really curious to know because I had said to her, why do we not hear the term genocide more in the public discourse about Ukraine, especially at the policymaker level when aid to Ukraine is being debated? And she said, that's the question that you need to ask. Do they have genocide in mind, even if they're supporting Ukraine? What's the motivation? And in considering that question, the phrase acceptable level of violence rang in my head. And I happen to be of Irish descent, and I preface citing the origin of this phrase, the most recent origin of this phrase, a very controversial moment in history when it emerged, by saying I'm not trying to introduce a new topic here, and we're going to have some different views. I know in previous conversations when I had mentioned, some Irish history in relation to genocide, it actually angered some people, and I don't want to sideline the conversation in that direction because that deserves its own discussion. What I'm doing here is pointing out what became a very well-known phrase that emerged in the midst of the Troubles. And that phrase is just that, acceptable level of violence. And the backstory to that is back in December of 1971, Reginald Maudling, who was then the British Home Secretary, essentially declared that the situation in Northern Ireland at that time amounted to what he called an acceptable level of violence. And it really caused an uproar. And again, without going into the nature and history of that time, that phrase alone, I think, still manages to speak to us. Because if we look around at what's happening, when we speak of things such as frozen conflicts, which this is not, but when we start using that kind of terminology and we're not using genocide, when it's been so clear and it's been demonstrated, and we know from the West and America's non-response to other genocides, which happened, as we see in A Problem from Hell by Samantha Power, which we've discussed many, many times on this space, that despite the fact that we have a genocide convention, the track record on living up to it has been pretty poor throughout the 20th century and now going into the 21st century. That the prevention level is not there at all. And really the convention was designed to prevent, not just to treat genocide from the rearview mirror, but to actually prevent it from happening in the first place. Because once there are victims, you're already too late to the game. And I think a lot of it centers on this term, acceptable level of violence, this phrase. Because if we look in our own domestic situation, and again, Samantha Power points out that the battle to prevent and to punish genocide really takes place at the domestic level, meaning that the US and countries in the West that have that kind of power and that are inclined towards or based on democratic freedoms that are looking in that direction and that are orienting themselves towards democracy, at least in varying degrees, those nations, that's where the battle is won or lost to stop genocide, especially in their own nations and in other parts of the world. It's at the domestic level. But if we are already tolerating, acceptable levels of violence in our own nation, we're not going to have as much empathy and political will to address it in other nations. So I kind of wanted to throw this out there tonight to get some thoughts on, just to get your thoughts, the listener thoughts. Does this resonate with you? I'll throw a few more examples and context in here, but I'm thinking for starters, and again, it's not to introduce this issue as a topic going in its own direction, but to just point out something that's going on and hold it up as an example of a tolerated level of violence that we have domestically. I point to gun violence. I'm not discussing the Second Amendment here. I'm not talking about any type of legislation. I'm talking about just the levels of actual incidents for all the complex causes there. And I have interviewed young men who have participated in and been victims of gun violence. And there's a podcast out there that I did with them and an article with two young men who were adjudicated by the courts and at a different publication I worked at for the time. So I got a real education in speaking with these young men about the dynamics there. But again, in terms of acceptable level of violence, what we're seeing domestically and how it could be influencing our lack of response to Ukraine, among many other factors, because there are some real, as we've talked about many, many times and continuously throughout, the space in 24/7, the impact of Russian disinformation, the impact of active Russian influence in hindering support for Ukraine, all of that. But at another level, even among people of goodwill, who may be inclined to support Ukraine if they thought about it a little bit more, I think this acceptable level of violence is an angle we need to look at. So with the gun violence, domestically speaking, and this has been pointed out many times, we've had, first of all, gun violence, the statistics are that, most, and it's changing a little bit the last time I checked the gun violence archive, but the overwhelming number of gun deaths, or the significant number of gun deaths at this point in this nation, are actually through suicide. So it is not through, though the mass shootings and all gain, of course, more media attention. If you look at the statistics, it's still suicide. It claims the most lives from gun violence. But even aside from mass shootings, and I live in a city with a lot of shootings, a lot. And even though it's declined a little bit, we still have a lot of shootings. And so you have things that never make the news. You'll have mass shootings. You'll have, 1, 2 victims. And I think Gun Violence Archive defines mass shootings as something like, it's like 4, not including the perpetrator, 4 victims. But the pattern, especially in recent years, has been, we have a mass shooting, just to take that as an example. And we live with this continuous, level of shootings. We have a shooting. There's outrage. There are vigils. There are marches. There are political speeches, sometimes a little knee-jerk reaction, and then it dies down. And then we go through this cycle where we repeat it, and we repeat it, and we repeat it. And that is, at some level, even if we're not articulating it, a statement of, you know what? Yeah, this is acceptable to us. I mean, we can be outraged temporarily and try to do things, but at the end of the day, we're just kind of shrugging our shoulders on this one as a nation. just on balance, collectively speaking. And if that's the case here, and that's just one issue. Another issue I'm thinking of, for example, another area that I've covered in my work as a journalist has been addiction. You have well over 100,000 overdose deaths from fentanyl. And I mean, I live in a city where we have one section of the city is internationally known, and I mean not just nationally but internationally known for the open air drug market that it is. I mean, it has made Al Jazeera, it's made BBC, there have been documentaries on it. And at the same time, and when you drive down those streets and you will literally see in broad daylight shootings at each other, drug deals, prostitution, and people trying to get on the subway, all in the same. You can just drive down those streets, and it's especially this one corridor, and it looks. And then you will see people living in open filth. Some might be dead. They've actually overdosed, and you can't tell. Open lesions, open sores, and then there are certain aid groups that try to go in and do some work, but it's just horrific. And there's an accustomization that's happened. So again, not to go too far into these examples, but turning it back to Ukraine, which of course is the focus here, I submit that some of what is behind this bewildering non-response to what has to be probably the best documented genocide so far on this planet, in terms of, if you think of all of the material that's been covered, you've had people who have, multiple trips by heads of state and high-ranking, officials from various nations who have been there, who have toured atrocity sites while the genocide is still going on. And what is throwing the brakes on this? And is it not in part because there is a lack of empathy, which we've talked about in previous Friday night sessions, that we have just gotten to the point where maybe we're too traumatized by the amount of information about tragedy that we get, by a number of civil unrest and the COVID pandemic and rises in various types of crimes and atrocities, maybe desensitization, for example, to sexual violence through widespread use of pornography. That's not out of the realm of possibility. That people have become, with all of the sexual violence that's happened in Ukraine at the hands of Russian soldiers, that when people hear about sexual violence, that maybe they're not as moved by it anymore, because unfortunately you have a multi-billion-dollar pornography industry that it tends toward. I mean, I've spoken to experts who say that in order to get the dopamine high that people get from, it's just like addiction, any other form, you're going to have to ramp it up, and unfortunately a lot of times that involves sexual violence. So again, this sounds kind of wide ranging, but I'm throwing this out there for consideration, this acceptable level of violence. And I'd love to hear what people think about that, if that's not in some measure behind the lack of response. Even saying things like, as long as it takes, on the one hand, yes, that sounds hopeful. That sounds like a statement of solidarity. But on the other hand, it sounds like, well, this is open-ended. You could just as easily argue that's open-ended because this is okay for now. I mean, if your house is on fire, you're not looking to say, as long as it doesn't hit the rose bushes, we're just going to keep the hose on it, and and it can burn, but as long as it doesn't go further than that. No, you want to extinguish the whole thing. Why? Because it's a life-threatening situation, not just for you, but for your neighbors. So, Prince, I don't know if that's an adequate explanation of where I was going with that. I hope it's not too confusing. If it is, let me know. But again, kind of throwing it out there in what's become our Sunday night seminar for for your review and consideration.
No, I think that was good. Talking through some of the things, it's like, what is an acceptable level of violence? Well, there was a shooting out in front of my house a couple of years ago, and the gun casings landed like 2 feet from my mailbox. Nobody knows where the bullets landed in the long run. But to me, that was an acceptable level of violence because it didn't, it scared me, but it didn't affect me, and that shouldn't be an acceptable level of violence. just the other day, one day this last week, I was driving, one of those rare instances where I was driving down the road and I saw an ambulance picking somebody up in a very looked unpopulated area of a park. And um, I didn't have to look very closely. I didn't have to go ask any questions. I knew they were picking up an OD because I know that park. That park, they pass out fentanyl testing kits so that people can test their drugs before they use them. Yeah. Um, is that an acceptable thing anymore? Anymore it is, you know? Um, I look and I know I'm going down some of the same roads you did. I look at this bike path here in that goes along one of our main freeways that I used to ride as a kid. And when I say I used to ride as a kid, I had to have been 12 years old riding this bike path alone. 11, 12, yeah, right around in there. Um, riding that bike path alone for miles. Now that bike path is full of homeless camps and there are biohazards along there because of bodily fluids and the death of homeless people, people who have OD'd, and on and on and on. And is that an acceptable thing? Now that's not well. I guess maybe it is. I don't know. Anyway, but then it also then then we look at this. I think from a broader level of we can look at these very I hate to call them small examples, but they are small examples. But then you take it and you zoom out and you look at Ukraine and all that is happening in Ukraine. And because it doesn't necessarily always happen every day where a bomb hits in Kyiv and kills over 50 people. But that's gone from the news now. Was that an acceptable level of violence? And and we can look at that all over the place in Kyiv. Is that an acceptable level of violence? And from how our lawmakers and our leaders are responding and reacting, I am so sick of thoughts and prayers, not just when it comes to Ukraine, but when it comes to a lot of different issues. I mean, I refuse to say, there are a few words that I refuse to say. Thoughts and prayers are one of them. You're more than likely to get a tater tots and pears meme from me.
I don't
Because
understand why they still say it, to be honest, because it just sounds
Yeah, no.
sarcastic now.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, Gina, go ahead.
Well, the other thing, and I mentioned this on Friday that Christina told me during our call, was the fact that, and it follows what you were just saying, that war can mask genocide. So when people are seeing they hit this and then they hit that, so Russia strikes and then Ukraine tries to strike back, that cycle that looks like just battles is actually genocide in microcosm. And it speaks to that in Article 2C of the Genocide Convention, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So even if Russia strikes don't kill everyone at a given hit, and you hear about injuries, first of all, injuries are bad enough. Losing your property and your sense of security and your ability to just live your life because someone, Putin in Russia, decided to try to rewrite history and use a spin the wheel method of coming up with excuses to invade Ukraine. This is just nothing more than raw imperialism, revanchism, and name the vice, okay? But the thing is, what Christina was saying is that not so little by little, but that continuous process alone is genocide, though it may look like war. What you're doing is, and we can see this. I mean, one of the statistics I saw was something that 40% of Ukrainians are going to need humanitarian aid. 1 in 5 Ukrainian businesses is, suffering terribly. So you're actively attacking the people, their cultural heritage, their sites. You are inciting people to genocide. You're attacking their ports. What else? You've tried to assassinate their leaders. What else how is this not genocide? What are we not getting? But again, back to Christina's point, that continuous cycle of battle can mask this very real genocide. And in a world that has so many active conflicts raging right now, can very well seem like a quote unquote acceptable level of violence. Because unfortunately, and this is something that came out early on in the full-scale invasion, certainly among Ukrainian experts I talked to, was this sense, and certainly Timothy Snyder and others have long been saying this, that we have seen Ukraine through Russian eyes for way too long. Russia dominated the narrative, dominated it in academia, and as one Ukrainian historian, Nick Rudnitsky at Manor College, told me, that Western academics got sloppy and they didn't even bother to look for the Ukrainian perspective. They wholesale accepted the Russian perspective. So Ukraine, unfortunately, it has historically, in many senses, been, and unfortunately, still now, is being relegated to that's a nation, well, it doesn't really matter. They're not quite Europe. They're not going to get into NATO. They're over there. And one of the worst excuses I heard in the early phases of the full-scale invasion among people was, oh, yeah, Ukraine, they're really corrupt, aren't they? Well, first of all, that's also part of the Russian narrative, and Russia itself is corruption par excellence. But the other fact that overlooks is that Ukraine is a fledgling democracy, and that it's coming out from, it's been coming out from under the shadow of, a totalitarian, a Soviet, highly corrupt, still corrupt entity. And to, as Archbishop Boris Gludziak one time said, Ukraine's a democracy. It's not a perfect democracy, but it's on its way. And somehow those corruption allegations, by the way, never get extended and contextualized to other nations that have corruption. And I think we can all find enough of that in the United States. So let's put this in some context. But again, back to this acceptable level of violence and war, masking it, and those countries don't really count. Like, think of how many countries, and this speaks to how do we prevent genocide? Is it okay to genocide some people on this planet? Because apparently it is. We don't seem to be standing up to do a whole lot against it. 2014, what did we do? More than 14,000 people, 14,400, I think, is the latest UN numbers on after Russia's atrocities in Ukraine from 2014 to the full-scale invasion. What did we do? It was okay for 14,400 people to die. It was okay for a superpower to come in and just wholesale go in and annex Crimea and foment quote-unquote separatist rebellion, which was really just Russian operatives in the Donbass. Why was that okay? Why was that, despite the fact that it was their sovereign borders and we also had the Budapest memorandum in place? Why was that okay? So apparently even then we were saying, yes, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay for Chechnya and Georgia and Syria. I mean, Putin's just being Putin, and we don't really care so much about those people. I mean, that's a lot of, there are days when I really struggle with that, because I watched Syria closely for a long time, and just when you thought the atrocities couldn't get any worse, they did. And what got done? And now we have the man who orchestrated them with the support of Putin, who is being quote unquote rehabilitated, Assad, right? So the Uyghurs, another case. Why is it okay to genocide the Uyghurs? We have a situation in Nigeria right now where the Fulani herdsmen are slaughtering Christians, and reporting coming out of there now said this is not just a herdsman farmer difference. These aren't tribal differences. This is active genocide. Why was it okay for Azerbaijan to basically starve and then expel 120,000 Armenians in Artsakh, which they call Nagorno-Karabakh. And then to destroy all remnants of Christianity, their Armenian Christianity. So apparently it is okay, and that there are acceptable levels of violence. And this is something we have to work hard to fight. But I see that Marcus's hand is up, so I'm going to take a pause here and let you speak. I'm sorry. I feel very passionately about this.
No, I love your passion in this. This is something I'm very passionate about. And if you're not giving voice to it, then it's not being voiced in many cases, unfortunately, tragically, unacceptably. But what I wanted to say was the years where the corruption index flipped between Ukraine and Russia were the Yanukovych years. But other than those times, Ukraine's been consistently trending above Russia in terms of the corruption index. Or below. Sorry, I think no, above. Yeah, first place is least corrupt. We'll talk about the math of that later. But yeah, so the only years that they were worse than Russia in corruption were the years the Ukrainians had to kick that guy out, which says a lot, right? That the Kremlin stooge came in and made the place more like the Kremlin. And we should also remember that there are European countries that no one talks about as being corrupt that are higher on or lower on the corruption index than Ukraine. So let's just throw that out there. Some of them are NATO allies. Some of them are causing problems in the EU. So yeah.
Gee, you're subtle. Yeah, Mark, you're funny. It's frustration. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Who's unmuted? Good evening, Dave. I'm sorry I haven't said hello. How are you, my friend?
Oh, I see how it is. So
Yeah,
can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Got a new mic set up, so we'll see how it works. But I just wanted to comment briefly on the Fulani situation in Nigeria. I have a friend that lives there, and their families they're Christian, and they've basically stopped going to any churches there because over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of people, just the Fulani and other pro-Muslim groups will just show up and kidnap people from church, and then they'll find them dead a few days later. And they often have lockdowns where they're not allowed to go out at all for a week at a time while the government and the different militias fight it out in their towns. So not a lot of news is coming out of Nigeria in the mainstream, but I'm in contact with this family continually, and it's really scary what's going on with the trying to eliminate the Christian population.
So so then when we look at Ukraine now, what are our leaders and lawmakers doing? And realistically, if I go back and I think about it to some degree, and this was something I thought about the other night, and this is sort of taking a different angle at this. Since 2014, we have looked at Ukraine, or I believe that the world, the lawmakers, some countries have looked at Ukraine and what was happening then as, oh yeah, that's just Ukraine. That's an acceptable level of violence. I'm putting words in people's mouth, but you get where I'm going with that. When realistically, the genocide happened then, and was happening then, and has been happening then since then, since, and there, but then it was an acceptable level of violence for sure. But our eyes should have been focused more on Ukraine and what was happening in Ukraine then. Because it is in that period of time, from 2014 to 2022, that even if you weren't sure that a genocide was happening, which we can look back on now and say that there was, you can definitely see that there were precursors and indications coming along that were leading towards genocide if there was going to be a full-scale invasion. So we get to the point then that the Genocide Convention should have kicked in way back when, because if there's even the indication of the intent to commit genocide, we have a duty to prevent that genocide. We never should have gotten to the point where we are today, because people saw things as an acceptable level of violence then, and it wasn't an acceptable level of violence, but they saw it as an acceptable level of violence then, but they should have been paying attention, because what was coming was a much bigger genocide, which started in February of 2022. And now they've adjusted their acceptable level of violence, because sure, it was acceptable then, but okay, let's throw some more violence on it. Oh, well, that's still acceptable. So maybe the question is, where is the line of an unacceptable level of violence that will make people act? Gina, go ahead.
Well, I think that the question has to be backed up even more. Again, the focus of the Genocide Convention is prevention. That's what the crafters of it had intended. That's what Raphael Lemkin, who was one of those and who coined the term genocide, having lost 49 members of his own family in the Holocaust and the Shoah. And, you know, again, the idea is once you've got victims, you're already late to the game. And I wanted to throw out for consideration, if anyone wanted to do a little digging to read this article by Helen Fine. Now, this is going back a ways. It's January of 1993, but it's compelling. Accounting for Genocide After 1945, Theories and Some Findings. So just to look at her abstract here, I think if it's okay to read some of this, because that's the thing. I think what's incredibly and tragically ironic is that as soon as we got the term and as soon as we got a convention, it seemed as if the world kicked into overdrive with genocides and mass atrocities. The 20th century is soaked in blood, and the 21st century is looking to exceed it at this point. It just time after time after time after time that these situations were allowed to proceed. And the thing is, not only have at the same time these atrocities increased, but so has our level of quote unquote international dialogue, international lawcraft agreements, global conventions. You know, you saw the COP convention over in Abu Dhabi, I think it was, right? And, you know, more and more global trade, an explosion of communications. I mean, we have faster communications than we've ever had. More people have access to global news and to you know, even just local communications than in the past. That doesn't mean everyone's included, but on, you know, on balance, if you look at it globally. So it's not a question of maybe in previous genocide, of course, the occurrence of it preceded the actual coining of the term, but maybe in previous centuries, maybe a country could genuinely say, you know, we're not there, we're not on the ground, and it takes 3 months to get there by the ocean. So are you sure? And that might have been quote unquote an excuse, or that might have been a mitigating condition. But now, what's the excuse? What's the condition? I mean, what's the mitigating factor? If you know it, you have ample documentation, and you still refuse to act. And then my other question would be, at what point does your knowledge of that genocide and failure to act on your obligations to prevent and punish, at what point does that become complicity? By allowing, you know, we talk about, and I know some things don't always scale up from the micro to the macro level or vice versa, but sometimes they really do. You know, when people, and again, I go back to that analogy of addiction, yes, a person in addiction is making individual choices, but very often the people around that person are part of the addiction in that they too are making choices that can enable it. And I'm submitting that I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to take away people's individual choices, but there is, again, to look at complicity. If you know that it's happening and you continue to allow it to happen, at some point, you really do have to ask, are you complicit in this? But to just quickly look at this abstract from this article, again, it's Accounting for Genocide After 1945, Theories and Some Findings. This appeared in the International Journal on Minority and Group Rights in January of 1993, and the author is Helen Fine. And she talks about this, and these are her findings. And that the first one is a mind blower. Findings show that most users of genocide are repeat offenders. So if we look at who is currently sitting in the Kremlin right now, I can think of about 3 nations where this already took place, right? Where he was practicing, to say the least. So that also becomes a question of that does not speak well to the other parties of the 152 other, because the Russian Federation is also a party to the Genocide Convention, but the 152 other nations that have watched this man do this in other nations. What is the problem that we cannot confront this? The other conclusion, going back to this paper by Helen Fine, is there is a high likelihood of political exclusion and discrimination of ethno-classes producing rebellions which instigate genocides and other state-sponsored massacres. And to no one's surprise, unfree, authoritarian, and one-party communist states in ascending order are most likely to use genocide. Democratic states in this era are not perpetrators against their citizens, but have been patrons and accomplices of genocidal regimes elsewhere. That's some food for thought. One-party communist states are 4 to 5 times more likely, or 4.5 rather, times more likely to have used genocide than are authoritarian states. States involved in wars are many times more likely to have employed genocide than other states. And in those cases, genocides both lead to war and war leads to genocide through several processes. The use of genocide in conflicts within the state in the regions that she surveyed tripled between 1968 and to 1988 compared to the preceding 20 years. Genocide and genocidal massacres occur so often that they may be considered normal in these regions. And here is another interesting point that she makes in her abstract. Journalists and scholars have often confused recognition of genocide and genocidal massacres by framing these cases as, quote, ethnic conflicts, by confounding the toll of war and massacre, and by conflating concepts. And I think that's very, very important here, that, journalists, and again, the one article that I read today, to Dave's point about Nigeria, the one article today that I read, and it was from a Nigerian journalist who was saying, yo, you guys don't have this right. And journalists are reporting this and saying, oh, well, it's the farmer herder conflict all over again. And that is just so, and that's the other thing too. That's how most people are getting their understanding about it. They're not tuning in directly to the domestic media in a given country. They rely on journalists to translate this and translate it accurately in a way that they can actually read it. And if the journalists get it wrong, then it's even worse, because a lot of people don't have time to say, oh, well, I'm not, that's kind of suspect. Let me go back and read 5 other newspapers from that country to see if I can suss this all out. Most people don't have that kind of time. And so there's a high level of trust that's placed in journalists to do their job, which is why, unfortunately, when, for example, certain former Fox hosts betray that and still call themselves journalists, it becomes a matter where they are actually risking people's lives. And one does have to ask the question if, in fact, they are not themselves inciting others to genocide. But I won't name any names there. However, again, disturbing stuff, repeat offenders on genocides. Why is that an acceptable level of violence? Why is that acceptable for a head of state or a regime to not just do it once, but do it multiple times. The other takeaway from here is that this is where, in order to prevent atrocities, you have to pay attention to civil wars in other countries or to disputes in other countries. So this isolationist tendency of we don't want to get involved in anyone else's business is absolutely the wrong attitude to have. That doesn't mean go in and interfere with their governance, but it does mean to stay engaged, to stay informed, and to hold other nations accountable for how they treat their citizens. Because what we're talking about with genocide, and what both Raphael Lemkin and Hersch Lauterbach, who both developed, Lemkin was genocide and Lauterbach was the concept of an international set of human rights. And you can read about that in East West Street by Philippe Sen. It's a wonderful book that contrasts their two lives, which intersected. And really those two concepts I see as balancing out. You cannot expect, just because you're in a given country, that you forfeit your rights as a human being. That's what we said never again to, that we were going to say there are human rights. And yes, governments and countries differ, but we have some ground rules here. And you cannot just say this takes place in my borders, my house, my rules. Again, to scale down, here in the United States, we say, no, you can't beat your spouse. No, you can't molest your children. We don't care that, that's taking place within the walls of your house. They have rights, and those rights are inalienable. And if you cannot if you cannot respect those rights, then you will be held accountable. So, yeah, again, just some more thoughts there, and I will be quiet because I can certainly go on, and I see we've got some hands up.
Yeah, and Marcus and Flicker fella, I hope you understand and have a little bit of patience with me. But I have been sitting here looking at Beneficial's profile, thinking, come up and speak, Ben. Come up and speak. I know you have something extremely valuable to say. So please, Ben, go ahead.
No
Prince,
pressure. Wow.
that's a lot of pressure right there.
Sorry, man. Sorry, man. So, you're the one who told us who you are. So, dude.
Sorry about that. Well, it's my brother who's more of what he is. But
No, I know.
no, I want to just say that I think what Gina's saying is, in my opinion, because I'm only one opinion. I agree with what Gina's saying, and and that's traditionally the problem with these kind of eliminationist or genocidal campaigns, is whether it's in, it doesn't matter if it's Bosnia or Rwanda, Guatemala. It's usually after the fact that people look back and and after all the terrible things have happened, and they say, "Oh my God, look what happened here," and and then it's and she's right. There are all these terms that are applied to it while things are happening, like crimes against humanity, war crime, uh, massacre, rape camp. But what it's connecting the dots that I think we need to do. That because all these things are part of a campaign, and it's important to recognize that the campaign is a national campaign. It's a project, and it's a project in this case by Russia. And when you, instead of like saying, oh, there's a war about Russia invasion and they want to take Crimea, and people get focused on the details of battles and whether there's going to be peace or not. But what hasn't been done is what never gets done, usually until it's too late, except like in the case of Bosnia, where the US came in and NATO, is to say this is a national project of Russia, which is what Gina's saying. And then what are we going to do about it? And it's twofold. One is to say that the people inside Ukraine for sure know that this is a national project of Russia, which is the reason why they're not going to stop fighting. The people outside Ukraine, like us, some of us know it, some of us don't know it, but definitely beyond like our group here and the people who think about it all the time, they think about other things. They look at it like a war, forever war. We have to fight because if we don't help them, then Poland and will be next, kind of thing. And it kind of like blurs what the Russian campaign really is. And I think that's incumbent upon us in a way to help the media and help the politicians, help the public understand that this is a national project. And when you see it as a national project, the Russians then then shape the space that way and connect the dots for people. And I think the media, yeah, they I know a lot of journalists. I used to live with a White House journalist. Um, I know them really well, the ilk. And they deal with a lot of things, and they don't really deal with the topic all that well, only a few do. And so I've been thinking about um, how the discussion can be shaped a little bit better. But I think the first thing we have to realize is that this is to call it a national project. The national project is to wipe out Ukraine, which is what Gina's been saying. And I think that there are ways of getting that across. And like I said, this is the problem. As Gina said, in every one of these situations where this happens, people look at the sort of like on the event level without seeing it as a phenomenon. And once you see, and so like people like us, we see it that way. So I don't know if I said anything profound. I'm just saying what Gina said. I think there are ways of dealing with the media that could be helpful. It's really late in the game, and the Ukrainian government is not good at this per se, because they're focused on getting airplanes and things, and they haven't, I don't think, made the case yet or made it clear enough, because it becomes again isolated topics like bring the children back, which is very, very important. But the whole idea behind stealing the children is to, eliminationist campaign, genocidal campaign, to destroy the next generation of Ukrainians. But that's not how it's phrased. It's phrased bring the children back, like this is about children, but it's about something much bigger than children. And so I don't think the Ukrainian government is capable at this point to frame this topic in a way that's going to get traction, and it's going to take something else. So I don't have all the answers right now, but I've thought a lot about how to do it. But I just want to leave it at that. So I don't know if that was a lot of pressure, Prince. I don't know if I lived up to it.
I think you did. Gina, do you have anything before we go to Flicker Fella?
No, I just want to say I think that's an excellent point about the event, that kind of lack of connection of dots between events. And I don't quite understand why the international community as a whole still remains so reluctant to use the word genocide. And to be honest, I'm really surprised. People that ardently support Ukraine, who it's like, are you not aware of the convention? And the thing that's curious to me is that, and again, it's not to try to conflate conflicts or open up a topic that's going to take us too far off course from Ukraine. But one thing I was really stunned by was how quickly South Africa filed charges of genocide against Israel. And when I asked Christina about that, I had to check through my transcript of the interview, but I recall her saying that it was, because unfortunately, because of the Holocaust, people do kind of naturally, associate, you know what I mean? That the term comes to mind more closely when it involves Israel, just because of the history there. So, and we didn't discuss it too much. I just don't understand what the reluctance is. And again, I think that's why we're having these discussions. How do you look at these atrocities? How do you look at these accelerating lists of atrocities and still fail to act? And, at some level, I think I have my own theories on it. I mean, to be honest, not that human history has been by any means perfect, but I do think that we have a much cheaper value of human life now in many respects, ironically speaking, because we've also made more advances in recent, decades and in, advocating, for example, for the rights of persons with disabilities or persons with mental illness or persons with addiction. It's just this very strange, if you really zoom out from like this 30,000, to this 30,000 foot view, you think, wow, in a lot of ways, I mean, it really would have stunk if you had like an addiction or mental illness in the 14th century, and today you have a chance of getting help for it. But at the same time, we have these mass atrocities that, it's just very curious. And I don't have the answer to it. That's what I'm trying to work out with you, is just keep doing more research and thinking about it and talking about it and saying, what is the holdup here? I also human nature. I mean, I'm a Catholic journalist and I happen to be a Catholic. I mean, that tends to be what you are when you're a Catholic journalist. And, my faith teaches me that through all the ages, human nature remains essentially the same. And while humans are basically good, they also have a tremendous potential for evil and some really bad inclinations that require Jesus to come down and straighten it all out. So, and that our, acceptance of that is a lifelong process. So we're never going to have perfection in this life. So I mean, I can look at this personally as a person of faith and kind of take some, sobering comfort in that knowledge that we will not get there is no utopia on this side of death. I mean, again, I speak as a person of faith. I know that there are many people in this space, different faiths and no face, and that's perfectly fine. I'm just telling you where I'm coming at with it from, coming at it from. And but all of that said, to me, there's no excuse that we have these laws, we have, a genocide convention, and essentially it seems to be gathering dust on the shelf, because this is beyond, I guess I just can't comprehend it. I can't comprehend it, especially after reading all the documentation that we've got so far. The New Lines report, the New Lines Raoul Wallenberg report, even UN reports, other reports, history of Russia. Why we are not doing more to end this genocide completely confounds me. Completely confounds me. And that's the only way I can put it, because I cannot. I cannot comprehend how you can see close to 20,000 children known abducted and their names changed and given Russian identities, and even in some cases their fingerprints burned off, hidden throughout Russia, placed in re-education camps. How is that okay? How is any one of the violations of the Genocide Convention in Ukraine by Russia okay? And collectively, they just become even more horrifying. And you still, with all the evidence, you still are dithering about aid, and you are still afraid to use the word genocide, and you still have Russia that does not have a valid legal reason to be in the United Nations. You had them on the Security Council. I mean, what? If this were a script, I've often said, if this were a script, it would have been sent back for implausibility, because some of the absurdities we have seen, this should never have happened. This should never have gotten this far. And I think probably, and I'll wrap up this particular sharing with this thought. I am stunned by how willing we as a global community seem to be to just kind of get by and not do any kind of long range planning here, and just kind of band-aid our way through situations like this. Instead of, we talk about systems and being systematic and holistic in dealing with a number of issues. You'll say, well, we want a holistic approach to healthcare or a holistic way of treating this problem. And yet we don't seem to be able to do that when it comes to genocide. We let things go. We don't pay attention. We don't intervene to prevent, atrocities from taking place. And, and then when it becomes really out of control, we say, oh, I don't know if we can intervene because we don't want boots on the ground there. That's the big thing. We can't have boots on the ground. That would just be terrible. Well, I'm just wondering, at what point does it just become unacceptable? Which is to go back to Prince's question. At what point? For the people in the United States who are actively, and this is the other thing that puzzles me, people who really have no knowledge of Ukraine, no experience traveling there, but they will virulently oppose any aid to Ukraine. Why? What do you know about this nation? Have you been there? Have you talked to survivors? Do you even know half of what's taken place, the atrocities? Yet you will argue up and down. And I have met people like this. And unfortunately, a lot of them are of a persuasion that has a 4-letter acronym to it. And I'll let you figure that one out. And some of them are friends of mine. And I don't understand it. I don't understand it, because you would like to think that if they truly saw what was going on there, if just a handful of images and a couple of reports would be plenty to convince them. But yeah, I find myself baffled. So I don't know if that made any sense. It's been a long weekend and a long day, but we continue to forge forward in trying to figure out why we are so slow and in fact, in many cases, inactive in responding to the sufferings of our fellow human beings, which could well become our own sufferings if we allow this slide. And I place this in the context of, for the past 17 years, according to Freedom House, we've seen an erosion in global democracy. It's not getting better. And democratic freedoms don't just grow on trees, and they don't stay in place unless you actively maintain and defend them. And if we are willing to let genocide this genocide in the context of a global decline in democracy go, God help us. God help us.
So
Sorry, Ben, I didn't realize you were about to say something.
no,
Go
I
ahead.
cleared my, and I didn't realize the mic was open. Do you mind if I just say something to Gina or about Gina?
Go
Which,
ahead.
in
Yes.
response?
No,
So,
please.
So, I have I mean, I think we all know the answer, Gina, and you said it, which is that there are very few democracies in the world, and most of the countries are, autocratic, or some kind of other kind of uh, system, and not very nice places, really. And they are, and many of them, or some of them, do terrible things to their own people and also to their neighbors. And so they're not going to, call the pot calling the kettle black. So it really relies on the United States and the UK and Europe, and it's a very few number. And not everybody is as open-hearted as you are, but I think England, and so on a country by country basis in terms of Ukraine, I think that the UK, and I've said this many times, they understand it the best, and they've been leading the US, and I think they understand it, because they went through it, because, as I've said before here, you know, and some people are not, or they forget that in World War II, Europe had been completely conquered by Hitler, and all that was left was the United Kingdom, their little island, and they knew that if they lost, a few battles, it would have been the end of them too, and that lives with them right now. And I've been in London, and I've been in England, actually around the UK a bit during the Ukraine war here, after full-scale invasion. And when you talk to people and you see flags, Ukrainian flags in England, and they've been, like, this week they brought another package. They do believe it, and they do feel it, what's going on in Ukraine, because they've been through it themselves. They've been in that kind of peril, and Churchill would never have relented to Hitler, and the U.S., the people here have not been in that peril, and I think that our government they care, they want Ukraine to win, whatever that means to them, but I think they have a different strategy in mind to make the win. They think this is a war of land, and they don't, and this is like the people in the White House, and so they figure, they're fighting over land. They're not fighting over the stuff that you're talking about and I'm talking about. And so they haven't really gotten it right. And it's really up to these two countries, and then the European ones. And the European ones are jumping in for their own reasons now in a different way. So I think it's on a country by country basis is what the response is. But the numbers are very small. And and you can't leave it up to the media, because the media, they go in all kinds of directions. I think the social media in a lot of ways is stronger than the traditional media when it comes to these issues, as far as we're at because politicians read polls, and the polls, and most people don't really get their information from the traditional media anymore. I'm sorry to say, Gina, because you're part of it. And I think that the social media is really the place where we can influence the politicians. So because I do think there are good people out there. They just don't have a clue. They don't have a clue. And finally, I'll say, if you look at the younger generation, like under whatever, that are pro Hamas at this point because of TikTok, it really shows you the power of, which is completely wrong. It's all like totally screwed up, but it really shows you the power of social media in shaping people's ideas about these things. And we just have not done the job that we could do, I think, in social media to succeed at this yet. So thanks a lot.
Go ahead, Gina.
Yeah, no, excellent points there. And it's interesting, Ben, when you were talking about, the one point you made about, like, the war kind of overshadowing. And that's a point that Samantha Power makes in her book, A Problem from Hell, when she talks about how, a lot of the American people were kind of living in this place, to quote W.A. Visserthoff, who was a Protestant theologian. They lived in this twilight between knowing and not knowing, and that they actually thought that, well, we'll just win the war. That's going to help stop Hitler's murder of civilians. And yes, Hitler needed to be militarily defeated, as does Russia. And I always go back to what Timothy Snyder said, many, months ago, early on in this, that for its own good, Russia needs to be militarily defeated, because it's not tenable, even for its own people anymore, in the condition that it's in. I mean, I don't know if you're following, like, Anton Gerashchenko or Jason Smart. I mean, typically, apparently, their aging infrastructure really breaks down when winter kicks in, but it's been on a really accelerated scale. I mean, you've got open sewage in some of these places where they didn't have the greatest septic systems or sewage systems in anyway, but because Putin has put his whole economy on a war footing, that's to the expense of his own citizens, where there's reduced access to healthcare services. And by the way, there's some really strong health issues. I mean, some really bad health issues there. I mean, you have rampant alcoholism, and there is also, and a quick Google search and Google Scholar will pull this up, there is also an unspoken of HIV epidemic there that is not being well treated at all. So, and then there's reduced healthcare access in a lot of Russia. So, but their social contract is basically, well, it's okay because we're happy to live on, as one Russian writer called it, a mountain of crumbs, because of this grand dream you've sold us, while you have, these ridiculous palaces and wealth and such. But I think that distinction, though, between war and genocide is important, because genocide doesn't always have to take place in the context of a war. And in fact, if you're going to prevent, the idea is that hopefully you haven't already gotten to the war stage. When you start to hear the language, when you start to hear the incitement, when you start to hear that othering and that demeaning, that's when it needs to stop. So we have to make these distinctions between war and genocide, because if we're just thinking in terms of, and it gets back to what you were saying then about connect the dots, if we're just thinking in terms of the military or equipment that's needed, or the bring the kids back, which, yes, that is huge. That's probably one of the most painful, if not the most painful issue for me personally in discussing Ukraine. but we have to see this as genocide. We have to see this systematically, and we have to see genocide as a process. There are, at least 10 identified stages of genocide, because we could have stopped this if we had kept that in mind. That is what I really struggle with. Why, for all of the information, for all of the scholarship, for all of the research, for all of the history, for all of the examples up into our own time, within just the last year, 2, 10, why do we still not get this? I truly don't know. Is it lack of empathy? Is it willingness to settle for short-term solutions? What's behind the erosion of democracy? Because obviously it's in the interest of more authoritarian regimes. They often use genocide. In the one article, the abstract I just quoted, a communist regime is really the highest on the scale, for using genocides. And we see that, of course, with the Uyghur genocide in China. But why are we as humans permitting this? Why? And then why are the democracies of the world not arresting this process and holding perpetrators to account? It's an unanswered question for me. I have a lot more work and a lot more research to do to get anywhere near a sense of what's really happening here.
Thanks, Gina. And thank you, Ben. I do want to remind you, Gina, it is 11:15 now. And we do have a few hands, so let's try to get through them. But when you're done, and that's all good. And if you need to go, you need to go. I know it's been a long week. It's been a long weekend. It's been busy. And so that's what we'll do. You let me know, and you can bow out when you need to. Flicker fella, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Prince. Hi, Nate, for that. Thanks for hosting the space. Thanks for the opportunity to come up and speak. I'm going to try to be brief. And by the way, I guess I'm going to jump on this grenade to follow, Gina's and Ben's roundtable discussion here, because as I was listening, my antennas basically in my head had melted several times. So you're welcome to everybody else who's gonna follow me, because you're gonna look and sound a lot better. But I just wanted to share some thoughts about this really thought provoking topic, and I really appreciate Gina and everybody else in the panel come up and share their thoughts, because it definitely helps me to broaden my understanding and depth, and reflect on things that we observe today, not only in Ukraine but across the world essentially, right? But the more I think about it, the more I think that the more I become convinced that the crux of the problem that we're trying to frame is is a significant shift that in our perceived value system collectively as societies essentially. I don't think it's the lack of democracies or the perceived declination maybe of democracies. I think that for a long time we had a very clear definition of good and bad, right? And today we're observing like this margin that used to separate the two, right? And we are discovering that this margin is actually growing, right? This margin has has its own limits essentially, right? But and this margin is basically the things that started this discussion, right? What's the acceptable level of violence, right? Where you start differentiating, what is wrong, what is right, what is good, what is evil. So the reason I think this margin is growing still today is because as society we become you know desensitized to violence essentially, right? I mean, the age of information and technology has brought around a lot of challenge, a lot of good things, but also a lot of problems. I think that we don't really see on the surface just yet, and maybe they're showing themselves in a different way. But I think the things that people used to perceive as violence, let's say before this internet thing, right, were nowhere near at the same level um, that they would consider to be normal as we see it today, for example, right? So that's one thing. And the second point that I just really wanted to make, I know there's a lot of questions that were asked here. Why we see what's happening in Ukraine, right? with in terms of this, in terms of the genocide that Russia's committing, and why we're not doing anything. And personally, it appears that um, this system we have with this global legislative body, right, UN, but we don't have executive body, right? We don't necessarily have even judicial body. And I'm kind of using this reference to the American system of checks and balances, but I think we don't really have anybody to enforce it, right? And by nature that really kind of de-incentivizes any country to really say, I'm going to step up and do stuff about this, because it's politically very difficult thing to do, especially if you have some weird internal politics. And also it's very it's economically risky, and it could be very unpopular as well, right? So there's just so many different things, by nature of how this whole thing is designed, that just incentivizes any type of action. And that's what really, I think, causing a lot of these problems, right? Because we can see what's wrong, we know what's going on, but either A, we're not going to do anything because we live in this ever growing acceptable risk spectrum, you know um, because we continuously get disincentivized, sensitized. And the other part is that our political system's just not calibrated properly to respond to something like this. It would be counterintuitive, almost suicidal, to political leaders to really do this kind of stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to share some of these points. Thanks.
Thanks, Flicker. Marcus, go on ahead, sir.
Oh, so I just wanted to say that I don't know if it's too conspiracy theory like, but to me, the South African accusations were always conveniently placed by let's point out again a BRICS country that is very closely tied to Russia, to denigrate the whole concept of trying a country in international court for crimes against humanity by putting a Western country on trial first. Because the reality of the situation is, why would it be South Africa of any country? They have their own scandalous history and recent history of chanting about murdering white farmers at rallies. But regardless, it's just too convenient. It just like the use of the word genocide now has been denigrated. This is just another thing to make it less impactful when eventually Russia's brought to task for this. Is they can say, oh, they throw this at everybody, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Marcus. Nancy.
Hey, this has been a great discussion, and I know that I don't have any answers, but man, I sure got more questions through this, and it really got me thinking on it. The question about, what is an acceptable, quote unquote, level of violence? I know, I think one of the things that it's both a relief and a frustration that we have been able to get Ukraine better air defense capabilities, because it's a relief because less people are dying. It's a frustration because while we know that genocide is still going on, both in the occupied areas and the attempts, albeit unsuccessful, Russia's continued attempts to destroy Ukraine are still genocide. But it's been easy for society to go, oh, well, because less people are getting killed, it's not so bad anymore. But when you extrapolate that out, would we ever consider a society that says, as long as we have a defensive shield that completely protects us, or 98% of us 98% of the time, then we'll just accept any level of violence against us? And back to some of the other points, that is not economically feasible, I think, for any nation to sustain. And it's not a way that people should have to live. And then I really start thinking out there, and it almost feels like the checkpoint that has kept us from having to, as a society, reconcile that has been mutually assured destruction risk of going nuclear. So we're in a situation now where Ukraine is facing, okay, if everything is on the table except for nuclear because of mutually assured destruction, then what the hell does peace look like? I mean, it's just a really exasperating conundrum that those tools that protect them have also allowed our societies to kick the can further down the road. And to Ben's point, that also pushes a government like Ukraine's put in that position. And I think any government faced with that risk would be put in that position of having to focus on, I need help to arm myself. And that really made me start wondering, can any nation effectively communicate an existential threat as significant as genocide to the outside world? I mean, isn't that what the Genocide Convention and that duty to protect is about? Is that realistic expectation that a nation or any of those other protected classes, when being genocided, wouldn't be able to effectively communicate that? And that's why we have the obligation to step in and step up. And that, it just leads me with those questions. Like I said, I don't have any answers, but it really gave me a lot of deeper thinking to pursue. Thanks.
Gina, go ahead.
Yeah, Nancy, and following up on what you said about numbers, and this really hit home when I was watching him testify on Artsakh, or Nagorno-Karabakh, in front of a congressional committee. Luis Moreno Ocampo, who was the inaugural prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, made the point. And this is when Nagorno-Karabakh was being blockaded by Azerbaijan. And the Lachen corridor, there wasn't aid getting through. It was 120,000 that were starving, and it was just horrible. And he said, the Genocide Convention doesn't have any numbers on it. And you don't actually have to kill anyone to violate the Genocide Convention. All you have to do is violate one of those conditions. And that could just be creating conditions of life or incitement. And we have to stop thinking in terms of, as you said, if you're saying, oh, well, just fewer people are dying. And then mentally we start thinking, well, it's better, it's not 56 people at once. And, it's one and they were older. And that's terrible. But unfortunately, that is how some people may be thinking, that it's too low a number. It's not as bad as it was in the beginning. However, we're rationalizing it. But again, the Genocide Convention doesn't have numbers, and it doesn't require any deaths to be violated. And I think those are key concepts to keep in mind. So I just wanted to add that in there, following up on what you said.
Thank you. James, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, yes, I missed most of this. I was doing other things, but what I did hear was very interesting. Thank you. So I was going to repeat something that Flicker said about systematic desensitization. I think has been ongoing for quite some time in the United States. And I think it's no coincidence that Ms. Butina went to the NRA and infiltrated there. and spread her influence amongst people to keep these assault rifles legal. And so I think that's something to think about. But I guess the other thing is just the nature. Part of the nature of who we are is obviously, to me, um, that we're good and evil at once. We're not perfect. So I'm just going to go through this quote quickly. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Gradually, it was disclosed to me, which I don't like the way he says that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. This line shifts inside us, it oscillates with the years. And even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. And even in the best of hearts, there remains an uprooted small corner of evil. So I mean, that's just to say, I think that is not a bad summation of who we are, and that's the challenge that we face is that we've got this. So that we're, you know, seeing genocide all the time on TV, if not genocide, mass murder, and we're hearing about it in the news. We are certainly getting desensitized to it. But let's not forget that the protection, one of the greatest seeds that we can plant that will help us prevent this, and we have to do primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention at the same time. The primary stuff takes a longer time to grow, but we need to do it. And well, I just lost my train of thought, but I think I got there close enough.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. I am actually going to say, Gina, I think we got through everything in about an hour and a half, which is really, really good. And I know that given the opportunity, we could go on for much, much longer. But I really want to say I appreciate you doing this second segment on Sunday nights with us, in depth with Gina Christian. It is proving to be absolutely wonderful, and I just want to thank you again, and let you know how much I appreciate it, and how much I appreciate you. And anything you want to say before you get kicked out of here and go to bed?
No, thank you. And thank you all, because as I view this as my Sunday night seminar, so that we can exchange ideas and come to a deeper understanding. I wrestle with this, as you can hear. And I agree. I think that, as we've been saying here, as James and Flicker, and really all of us have said, that we find ourselves frustrated because we're confronting some very deep things in human nature. And I think that's really what it comes down to. And we were reading an excerpt from a book that I'm hoping to discuss in an upcoming Friday night session, that essentially said, really genocide kind of, it's a stress test for humanity, and it shows what the worst in humanity is, and it shows, when people have to confront it courageously, what the best in humanity is as well. It's really that kind of a crime that stops the clock and makes you think of, who are we, what do we want to become. So this wrestling is necessary, and it will continue, because there is no political strategy or war gain, or war victory that will end genocide. It's not going to work that way. And I think that gets back again to the framers of the Genocide Convention, to what Lemkin and all of his collaborators were doing, his colleagues were doing. They wanted to make sure that we had a name for an atrocity that had taken place throughout human history, that we really did never want to see happen again. And we have a long way to go to live out that vision. At least we have the language for it. I do take hope in the fact that we at least have a word for what's happening, and we do have laws that are in place to stop it. And we need to do more work in the actual prevention. And right now, what we need to do is make sure that we continue to support Ukraine, that it does not become another historical casualty to genocide, but that we seize this moment to truly reaffirm that we mean never again. Never again should any nation, should any people on this earth have to fear that they do not have the chance to exist because some other nation or group decided that they weren't worthy of it. That is completely unacceptable, and we must do everything in our power to make sure this never happens again. It will take courage. It will take us probably really annoying a lot of people. I have annoyed a lot of people in my process of trying to find out more information, chasing down people, calling my elected representatives. The other day, I think I shared this I might have shared this last week or shared it Friday night, one of our Friday night sessions, but I actually called one of my representatives as I've been calling, and the very harried staff member who heard me starting it on my spiel interrupted and said, "I just want you to know he supports Ukraine." And I said, "I'm very glad to hear that. And I look forward to speaking with you again tomorrow." So, but this takes a lot of work and a lot of courage, and we can't let it go. We can't let it go. So I just look forward to these sessions. I'm grateful that you let me come on and speak as well on Sunday night. And I learned so much in spending this time with you. So thank you as always. And above all, my gratitude. I retweeted a picture from Defense of Ukraine today. It was actually 4 pictures, I think. And it was the faces of soldiers in action. And it really brought it home to me that, there they are in the cold, in the snow, and they are fighting for the lives, their loved ones' lives, their nation's lives, and really the lives of everyone who wants to live in freedom and democracy and who wants to say to the authoritarians of this world who want to take that away from us, no, it stops here. And these guys are on the front, these men and women are on the front lines of that. And I always salute the defenders of Ukraine, the first responders of Ukraine, the officials and all the leaders of Ukraine, and above all the Ukrainian people within Ukraine and globally. So you have made me a better person, and I thank you all. So, Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava. Good night, Gina.
Good
We'll see you
night.
soon.
Do
And thank you so
побачення.
much.
До побачення. Ladies in the audience, you can correct my pronunciation, but I think I got it right. До побачення.
Okay, here, wait. Slava Isu Christu. Isu
Slava
Christu.
навіки. Slava навіки.
There you go. All right. Slava Ukraini. Go to bed.
Героям слава.
Good night. All right.
Slava.
It's the exchange of all of the different Ukrainian phrases that go back and forth, and it is a lot of fun and learning a lot. And Gina, I think, helps us all learn a lot, and I really appreciate her spending 2 nights a week with us, 2 of her late evenings, and sacrificing some sleep to be able to help us learn and educate ourselves. So, yes. So, Dave, how are you, man?
I'm doing okay. Trying to figure out exactly why my new phone is crashing. You might have noticed I took a little dive off of the co-host chair and just came back up. Hello?
Yep. Hello.
You can hear me okay?
Yeah, there you go. I thought perhaps you might want to talk about diseases tonight that happen to do with eggs.
I wonder why. Yeah, that might be a fun topic to talk about. This whole egg thing is kind of baffling to me, that a country that supposedly is so advanced but they can't manage to keep their egg production going good. Yeah, that seems like a very basic thing. Eggs are one of those things that whenever there's a snowstorm or something like that, you always think of grocery stores. You go there and they're going to be out of milk, eggs, and bread, and probably beer and vodka, at least in
You
some
don't live in
places.
Portland, Oregon, man. You don't live in Portland, Oregon. I'm telling you right now. You know what Portland, Oregon runs out of?
Huh? Marijuana?
No.
Never.
No. No, are you kidding? I wonder. I actually should check. They don't. That's too late. But I was going to see if the pot shop will deliver during this ice storm. I don't think they will though. No. What Portland, Oregon runs out of is kale. I kid you not. Portland, Oregon runs out of kale.
I probably because it's really good for sticking under your tires if you're stuck on some ice or snow. All that fiber gives you a lot of traction. That's probably what they're getting it for.
Yeah, that might be it. Yeah, that might be it. Lordy. So,
Hey, that's the
Dave,
only thing I can think of that's kale's good for, really, other than, I mean, it's great for filling up empty trash cans too.
yard debris bins. It's good for filling up yard debris bins.
Yep.
Actually,
Yard debris.
it's good for changing the color. Okay, you don't want to know this. It's really good for changing the color of my bird's poop. My birds eat it all the time, and I can sometimes tell by the kind of kale that they've gotten. But seriously, I'm not kidding. Once they had a mix that was really, really heavy in beets, and I was looking at it, it's like, do you need to go to the doctor? Anyway, but no, yeah. So I did I did want to talk to you though, about some eggs and some possible issues with eggs and transmission to humans and things like that. But I wanted to see what Love's Democracy came up to talk about, because she put her hand up even though she put it down, but I know it was up. So Love's Democracy, how are you this evening?
I'm great. I've been listening, I don't know, since book club, I guess. But what the reason I put my hand back down was because it sounded like we were moving on to eggs, and I was trying not to pull us back. But I understand not everybody likes kale, and I do think that it would be great to put under your tires. I do think that that would be a very good use for kale. However, I currently have kale in my refrigerator right now because I am making zuppa Italiano, which which I haven't started it yet. So, but it's going to be delicious. It's yummy, 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 delicious. And I also make kale chips. So, you know, be a hater if you want to, but you're missing out.
I do agree with the Zuppa.
I have kale chips occasionally, so I'm not a complete hater, but I also don't particularly like it for other things. So I think maybe it deserves some of the bad rap that it gets, but I mean, you can go ahead and eat it if you like it. I'm not going to stop you. In fact, I'll give you some.
It's, I like roasted chickpeas too. So, it's, what can I say? I also, have you ever had those? They are really freaking good. Anyway.
I have, yes.
Yeah, they're really good. They're a great snack. Great snack, high in protein. So my question then, Dave, is what is it with H1N1 and salmonella on eggs that are causing Russians to go absolutely crazy upset because they got a bad batch of eggs?
Well, let's start off with the correction. It's H5N1. So there's difference H1N1 mostly infects people. H5N1 mostly infects birds. So big difference there. H5N1 is extremely deadly for avian populations. So that's the one that will go through and wipe out millions of birds overnight, which is probably not going to be good for Russia's future egg production. So they brought in some eggs from Turkey. I'm secretly wondering maybe Turkey had tested these eggs and knew what was in the eggs, and so they were kind of like, let's offload these contaminated eggs to Russia. It's kind of like this covert biowarfare thing going. But they were 1 in 5, so 20% of these eggs that Russia got were infected with H5N1. It can infect people very rarely, but when it does, it's 50% lethal. So if somebody doesn't cook their eggs, if they're like into the whole raw egg drinking thing, mixing it with some vodka, I don't know if it depends on how long it's mixed in with the vodka. If the vodka would have a chance of inactivating the virus. Overnight, it would probably be safe, but if you making a quick eggnog and you just mix it up and drink it right then, it's probably not going to do much. But you can, if you are an unlucky person, which it seems like maybe a lot of Russians would be considered unlucky, having lived there. You could get H5N1 from that. Not likely, but it's so it's also it's more likely to cause a problem with infecting their chicken population if it gets out, which would only further restrict their egg supply. So Linda popped up your hand. Do you have a comment?
Dave,
What?
I think that their chicken population is already greatly degraded. I think they had to kill most, if not all, of their. I really do. I think they had to kill most, if not all, of their chickens because, or they died because they weren't able to get the high quality food from the West because of sanctions. And that's how we ended up in the chicken egg crisis to begin with. So, it's not going to be anything to kill. I don't think there's anything to kill off because of the flu in Russia. I think they have screwed themselves because they went to war and they are attacking Ukraine and people are putting sanctions on them. So they couldn't buy decent feed. So they got crappy feed and it killed their chickens. And so they have no eggs and their chicken population is gone. And so they're having a chicken crisis now too. And this part of what they had hoped to do with the eggs that they got from Turkey, which, mind you, are bad eggs, was to help to repopulate their chicken population. But they're sort of screwed on that now. Besides the fact that we were all hoping that they would all be roosters instead of hens. But I don't think you can guarantee that. But they now have this other issue. What do you think of that, Dave, before we go to Linda?
Well, I think it's I'd say that what Turkey needs to do is make sure they got a lot of salmonella in the next batch, because really throwing H5N1 at a country that doesn't have a lot of chickens to begin with, they'd get a lot more mileage out of salmonella. That would infect a lot more people. So just heads up, any turkey people listening, to get some salmonella over there on the eggs the next batch.
All righty, that works. That works. So Linda, how's the cheap wine tonight, my friend?
I don't have near enough.
And how am I going to eat my eggs if they're not soaked in wine? This is a problem.
That sounds disgusting. Um, yeah, that's all I'm saying. That sounds disgusting.
Well, you're not the connoisseur that I am.
I've never heard of mixing eggs with wine. So
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, no. Boy, howdy, yeah, I just don't. Eggs and wine, no. Mm-mm. I mean, it just you knew she was gonna do something like this, Napo Dave. I knew she was gonna do something like this. So
so yeah.
I
Go
would
ahead.
say the alcohol content of the wine is probably not going to be high enough to inactivate the H5N1. So just look
Yeah.
out, or the salmonella.
When you first started talking, the reason I raised my hand is because that was going to be my question, but you answered it, which was if you cook them, um, they should be fine, right? I never thought about putting vodka in them, but I would think it would have to be a lot of vodka.
It is Russia, so
Oh, there is that. Yeah.
yeah. But cooking the eggs will kill everything. So
As long as
it'll
you don't have egg on the counter and then set the cook eggs somehow cross contaminate. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Kind of like
There's all
raw
sorts of
chicken,
ways.
only eggs. Pardon?
Yeah, exactly. You can cross contaminate from putting the cooked product back on the spot where the raw product was.
Yeah. So there's that. And as a side note, when I was a kid, my parents still had like, a backyard. They never called it a victory garden, but it was a victory garden. World War II era, blah blah blah. All kinds of veggies. Huge garden in the back because we had a big backyard, and a bunch of chickens running around, which I like to chase, right? But anyway, when I was tiny, and mom used to make homemade eggnog with raw eggs. And well, when I was 3 years old, there was no alcohol involved in her eggnog that she made. Let's put it that way. Um, but I apparently, well, number one, either they didn't know better back then, or because they were backyard chickens running around, they weren't really contaminated with anything. Question mark? I never got sick. It was really good eggnog, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I grew up on a farm with lots of chickens. We made our own eggnog. We had our own milk. It was non-pasteurized raw milk. Yeah, back in the good old days before diseases took over.
Yeah. Yeah.
So loves democracy. You have a comment?
Well, I do. I've never spoken to Linda before, but after, the past about 5 nights of hearing about this cheap wine, I feel comfortable saying that if you're chasing chickens, you've had too much cheap wine.
But I was
Cha-ching!
3.
I'm
Sorry,
just
I can't talk. I'm laughing too hard.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's probably good advice.
Oh, good Lord, the cheap
So
wine. The cheap wine is going to stick with us for quite a while, Linda. Anyway, so yeah, so um the Slavi likes the cheap wine idea, and always as I do, please remember, Linda, if you've got the box, don't forget to tip it. I've also I've also heard suggestion that you could rip open the box and actually cut a hole in the bag, and that way you're guaranteed to get every last drop out of that box of wine. So, yes, Oh,
Goodness knows
man.
you don't want to waste any. So yeah.
No, 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 no. I'm sure you lick the glass too. All right. So,
Well, on the eggs, also, I thought it was funny the positive spin that Putin tried to put on this is saying that the reason for the egg shortage wasn't because production fell; it was because everybody suddenly got so rich that they were just buying more eggs, and production couldn't keep up. I mean, that's really kind of looking twisting your viewpoint around so that you're kind of looking yourself in the butthole there. I mean, just
yourself around. Oh my goodness.
twisting himself around so far. Yeah, it's like, no, our egg production didn't fall. Everybody's so rich now; they're just buying them all.
Because eggs are such elite food. I mean, only rich people eat eggs. Only
Exactly.
rich people eat eggs. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I think we have produced some hands, and I lost track of whose hand went up first, but you know what? I'm going with the Ukrainian. Slavi, how are you?
Hey, oh, me first. To the cheap wine, I wanted to say I approve this message, and to the expensive eggs, I wanted to say I still don't understand how that works. What Putin said. I've been trying to work out the math in my head, and for the love of God, I cannot figure it out. If people make more money, the eggs are more expensive. I don't know. Um, if somebody has any advice or has figured it out, let me know. My DMs are open.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. So you're making more money, so we're gonna raise the price of eggs for you. Shouldn't you feel so honored? Yeah, no, it just doesn't quite work in my brain. I mean, it's like,
The
yeah,
motherland provides.
the motherland provides.
Does it though? Does it?
I think that's part of the point. I think that's part of the point. Christopher, what kind of enlightening information do you have about boxed wine?
The motherland provides. QB's following me.
Dude, how did you do that?
Wow.
I don't know, but QB's following me. I just saw it.
I even sent QB a message, and QB isn't following me.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I just thought I would mention it. Box wine? You It's got an expiration date on it, right? No.
How about Annie Greensprings?
Who's that?
Linda, remember we're 55. We are the 55 club. The three of us right here. I'm pointing at my screen. You can't see which of us, but the 55 club. Yes, Christopher, Dave, and Christopher, Dave, and I are the 55 club. So yeah.
What's the 55 club?
We were all born in the same year, man.
Ah.
1968.
Yep.
The year that changed America, apparently.
It's a good year.
Pops.
It's a good year. It's a good year. All right. Let's go to Paige. Paige, go ahead.
So you guys knew damn well, talking about eggs and sucking bags, that I was going to come up. And then Napo Dave had to bring up buttholes. So I was just coming up to say hi, and that I'm here, and I'm here to support Ukraine and this conversation. Thank you.
So we have summed up the night with eggs, bags, and buttholes. And it's just like, what on earth happened to this conversation? I need to change the title, please. We cannot.
Well,
Heather, I'm in the NAPO. Sorry to jump back in really quick. I was just going to say I work in the NAPO morale department, so I always have to encourage fun moments like this, because we all need a little smile and laugh at times. So
the NAPO moral department or morale department? Because
oh, morale. There's no morals, zero morals.
Well, yeah, exactly what happened is you asked me a question and we proceeded down the garden path to the NAFO night shift. And looks
Boy,
like,
did
we
we ever. Boy, did we ever. We start talking about eggs, we go on to bags, and now we're on to buttholes. Holy crap. Will.
Well, I just thought that was just one of, it was a visual that it just seemed to me that that's what Putin is doing, is he's inspecting his own anus. Go ahead, Will. I'm sure you have something to add to that.
Is peak absurdistan, Dave? Is peak absurdistan? Putin is saying, who you're going to believe, Dave? Your lying eyes or me, right? We have made all Russian citizens millionaires, but unfortunately now one needs to be a millionaire in order to afford eggs. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's peak disinfo, right? It's peak gaslighting, bullshitting, propaganda to your own population internally. Don't believe anything you see, Dave. Don't believe your lying eyes. You're actually rich, and you're rich in eggs and rich in everything. It's just that you're now going to need a $1 million salary to afford it all. But you'll have to talk to your employer about that, and he'll get back to you.
Oh yeah, this reminds me of the situation in if any Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy aficionados out there, where the group that landed on Earth Take Two, and they decided to make leaves the monetary their monetary system. So of course everybody instantly became incredibly wealthy overnight because they could just but then a loaf of bread cost a whole forest. Hello.
I am Leaf
Hi.
Rich, but
Hi.
cash poor.
Don't forget
Yeah.
your towel.
Let's go to Love's Democracy.
Yeah, I have my towel. Go ahead, Loves.
Okay, perfect timing. First of all, I want to thank Will because I needed a few minutes to be taken up. And amazingly, he must have known that because he stopped talking exactly when it turned midnight Eastern time, which is amazing that he knew that from Australia. And I did
You're
realize,
welcome.
thank you. So the two things I wanted to say is that one, you must be having too much box wine if you're mixing eggs wine if you're mixing eggs